Hello, training 17. If you don't know me, I'm Meredith Hawley. I am a lawyer, power dynamics facilitator, and best-selling author. And today I want to talk to you about how you can know if it's time to leave a toxic workplace. Hey, Kimberly. I talk to people every week who they come to me and they say, I literally had someone come to me and say, I slept 2 hours last week. I had another person, same week, another person say, my doctor told me if I go back there, I'm going to die. If I have another recurrence of the symptoms that she had, she's going to die. And then they're like, is it okay for me to leave my workplace? And I think this is such a fascinating question. And partly it's fascinating because a lot of times on the other side, what happens is people leave a workplace and they either go into another workplace with a similar atmosphere, or they leave the workplace and their symptoms actually get worse sometimes, and they kind of spiral into a negative situation. And so you want to take a number of things into consideration if you're thinking about whether it's time to leave a toxic workplace. But the first thing you need to address is the symptoms that you're actually having. So I talk to people who can't sleep. They have extreme weight loss or extreme weight gain. Memory loss is very common, hair loss, panic attacks, high blood pressure, loss of high functioning, like people who can't do math anymore because they're feeling so terrible at work. And the interesting thing about this is that if we had those symptoms because of a flu, because of a virus, we would probably go to the emergency room. If we had those symptoms because of a broken leg, we would treat this as something going terribly wrong, and we would go to a professional to take care of this, right? We would take it seriously. But because it has to do with our emotions, because it has to do with our feelings, a lot of what we do is we say, that's not real. This isn't bad enough. There's something wrong with me. If I just push through, it'll be okay, right? It'll get better. If I just push through, and it doesn't work, right? Any more than it would work if you had a broken leg and you were saying, it's not bad enough yet, I'll just push through. Your broken leg gets worse, right? So partly though, I think what happens is when it has to do with our feelings, we think there's nothing that we can do about it because we think our feelings are coming from our external environment. So we think we have to change our external environment in order to change our feelings. And this gives so much power to our external environment. And usually when we're in situations like this, it's giving power to someone who we don't even respect, right? We're giving power to a person or a situation that we think is terrible. And we're saying, I have to feel anxious. I have to feel terror every day. I have to feel humiliation every day because of this external environment, right? And there's nothing I can do about it. And this is like an interesting thing to take a look at. We don't do this with a broken leg or with the flu, right? We say, even if someone comes up to you and breaks your leg, then you still have your broken leg to deal with. And we say, okay, I'm not maybe going to put my leg in front of that person again, but I'm going to heal my leg. I'm going to take a month off and I'm going to lay in bed and heal my broken leg. But we don't do this with feelings, usually because we don't know how, right? We don't know how. When we have the emotional equivalent of a broken leg, we often don't know how to take the month off and heal that, right? So what I like to do is talk about this in terms of the legal concept of the Americans with Disabilities Act. and talk about this in terms of if you're having an emotional disability, right? And so a lot of times we don't want to use the word disability or ability, like we think it's stigmatizing, but really under the law, there are just a number of factors that you look at to see if something is a disability, if it's a disabling illness, right? If it's interfering with your ability. Doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're worse. In fact, disabilities are the key to innovation. When people have differences in ability, this has consistently created new innovations in how we deal with in different industries. So for example, email was created by because someone was deaf, and it was created as a solution for deafness, right? And who benefits from email other than deaf people? All of us, right? The same can be true with anything that we classify as a disability. So a disability is a physical or mental condition that substantially limits a major life activity. So I'm going to say it again. It's a disability is a physical or mental condition that substantially limits a major life activity. So if you're considering whether you or someone you know has an emotional disability, this is what we look at, is does it substantially limit a major life activity? So when somebody can't sleep, when somebody has significant weight loss or weight gain, when somebody has memory loss, hair loss, high blood pressure, loss of high functioning ability to do math. All of these are major life activities that I see quite often substantially limited by people's emotional experience at work, right? And so identifying that doesn't mean that you have done something wrong, that you're bad, that you have to stay there for forever. So a lot of times we think if we acknowledge a feeling that we have, that it's gonna be there for forever, right? That we're saying, or that if we're acknowledging that we have an emotional disability, that it means that we're gonna be permanently disabled for forever. But really, in my experience, acknowledging the reality of your experience is the first step towards changing it, the first step towards turning it into a growth innovation experience, right? So when we're resisting identifying the place that we're in emotionally and how it's impacting our lives, we're letting it get worse and worse, the same way that a broken leg gets worse and worse when we won't identify that our leg is broken, right? But it doesn't mean that it's a permanent condition for the rest of your life. So for example, diabetes is classified as a disability because it substantially limits your ability to regulate insulin. But plenty of people have diabetes, and if they ignore it, it can be life-threatening. If they handle it in a healthy way and treat it and are smart about it and acknowledge it, they can live like a fully functional life and be very productive, and it can have no impact basically on their life, right? So once you have, so this is the first step, is that you want to consider, are you in a situation where you're actually experiencing an emotional disability, where you're experiencing something that substantially limits a major life activity? And be honest with yourself about whether it does or not. If it doesn't, then that's awesome, and no pressure to pretend that it does if it doesn't. If it does, it's also okay, and it is the first step towards considering whether you need to leave your environment or make other steps to address the disabling issue, right? So after you've determined that, if you have determined that there is an emotional disability experience happening here, you want to ask yourself, is it like, can you perform the essential functions of your job under these conditions? Can you realistically get your work done? Or is performing your work under these conditions really threatening your health, right? So for example, take the diabetes example, right? If you have diabetes and your work requires you to drink sugar all day, it's not a good idea, right? And in the same way, if you have like terror every day, and then you're required by your workplace to put yourself in a situation that is triggering that terror every day, it might be time to take a step back. This doesn't mean you can't ultimately do your job. It just means that it is the place to take that seriously, take a step back and consider what your options are for addressing the terror first, and then going back to your job from a place where you don't have to experience that every day. So then the third step is that you engage in an interactive process. So this is all what we do when somebody has a physical or mental disability in their workplace. You engage in an interactive process to accommodate yourself. And so what that means is, for example, like if you are in an environment and you can perform the essential functions of your job, even with the feeling that you're experiencing, then what you want to do is decide how you can modify the work that you're choosing, the environment that you're choosing, in order to give yourself a little bit of space in the environment. So for example, like one way to do that is instead of having in-person calls, you have calls on the phone for a little while. Instead of working on one particular area of work, you ask to move to a different area of work for a little while. And so these are temporary fixes, right? As you figure out how to treat the underlying issue. So for example, if I break my leg, right, and my job requires me to walk every day, then I might need an accommodation of some kind of transportation mechanism, right? So I talked to someone the other day who had a stroke, and so he had some physical limitations in his legs, and he could ride around on a Segway during the day. This was an accommodation that they gave him. And so if you have the broken leg, you get this accommodation while your leg is healing, but you still go to the doctor and heal your leg. So leaving your job or limiting your job or taking time away from your job is a temporary fix. It's a temporary accommodation as you treat the underlying issues of what you're experiencing, right? So the underlying issues of what you're experiencing always comes down to what you do have control over in this environment. And what you do have control over is the thoughts that you're thinking and the way you're treating yourself and what you're believing about yourself in the environment. So if you're believing that you're powerless in an environment, if you are believing that you can't say your opinion, that you don't have respect in that environment, how can you shift those beliefs to ultimately create an internal environment that is safe for you? And sometimes the best way to start that process is to leave an environment, but then you also have to do the additional work in order to make sure that you can show up as yourself and be yourself in any environment. So what ends up happening if we have to only leave an environment without treating the underlying cause of our feelings is that we end up making ourselves smaller, right? We leave this environment and we say we can't go back to it. Then when there's a new issue, we again make ourselves a little bit smaller, and we keep making ourselves smaller and smaller and smaller, and it never treats the underlying issue, and it only punishes us. So this is like, if we're not willing to get help to treat our broken leg and we're just protecting it from anyone who would touch it, we can't go to the doctor and we can't see it, and we end up being able to go fewer and fewer and fewer places because the infection gets more, like it gets infected and the infection spreads more. This works the same way with how we feel. So if we're avoiding triggers, sometimes it's healthy to avoid triggers while you're treating the underlying issue, right? But if we consistently have to avoid triggers, what we're saying is that we can't go certain places, right? And so if we can heal the underlying issue, then we can go into triggering spaces and then have the commitment to ourselves that we still keep ourselves safe even when we get triggered, right? You develop a system where you can be triggered, and then you can lean into the trigger knowing that on the other side there is something healthy. This does not mean that you sort of say yes to unhealthy behavior, that you justify unhealthy behavior, that you like pretend things that you don't want to tolerate are okay, right? That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is being able to take some space. If you're in a place of emotional disability, take some space. And then when you come back, know that even when you encounter behavior that you don't want to tolerate, you have a strategy for it that keeps you safe and that treats yourself with respect and that makes an impact on the environment. So this is kind of a complicated, high-level concept. And the main points of it that I want you to take away are that the symptoms that we have from our feelings, the physical symptoms that we have from our feelings, are serious sometimes, and we need to take them seriously. And that does not mean it has to limit you and your ability to handle your life. But it's worth getting help, getting treatment, addressing those issues so that you can come back healthy. It's not a death sentence. It's not something that has to change your entire life, but it is worth taking it seriously. All right, you guys, if you know anybody who is struggling at work, as always, send them our way. Send me a private message or have them reach out. And thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next training.